Hey, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining today's Employer of Choice session, which is on the topic of well-being. So this is obviously an incredibly important topic to discuss, and I think there's a long way to go between understanding the kind of individual needs of employees and how leaders and employers can better support their team. So really looking forward to today's discussion. Just a few logistics before we get going. If you don't mind just keeping your microphones on mute while the panel are talking, that would be great. But we do encourage questions. We want it to be an engaging session, so please feel free to pop them in the chat box throughout the session. And as you may have already noticed, this session is being recorded. So you might have noticed the singing pun in the title of the session. So in a moment, I'm going to hand you over to George from OnSong, and he's going to give you a little bit of background about what he does. Okay, right. Over to you, George.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Lovely to see you. I am from OnSong. I started OnSong a number of years ago, and we support mental health and well-being in organisations around the country, nay, around the world, since the great online pivot. And we're going to start today by thinking about our own well-being a little bit, just connecting to our bodies and our breath. So you can stand or you can do this just sitting down. We're just going to do a couple of shoulder rolls just to loosen our shoulders up. A couple of shoulder rolls going forward, really stretching up to your ears and going backwards, going back the other way. That's it. And then we're going to reach up to the top. And when we get to the top, we're going to let out a big, loud yawn as we bring our hands down. That's it. We're going to do it one more time. I think everybody's on mute, so you have absolutely full license to go for it as loud as you possibly can. Big breath in, stretch up, give it a little wriggle at the top. And a big yawn, loud as you can. Thank you very much. Now, normally we would delve into a heck of a lot more in terms of warming up our breathing, warming up our faces, warming up our bodies. But for the purposes of this panel, I'm gonna move on and tell you just for a couple of minutes a little bit about who we are and what we do. So, OnSong was set up a while ago to support organisations in their mental health and well-being. I come from a musical background. I've been lucky enough to have music as part of my life for many years. And indeed, my mother's grandfather was the navigator and the ship's musician. He was an officer aboard the Discovery alongside Captain Scott and Sir Ernest Shackleton. And I think about him in our work. I think about him in terms of what we talk about well-being. We talk about seasonal affective disorder. We talk about the power of music in our work. You know, they went down and were iced in on the Ross Ice Shelf for the winter, and it was dark and it was very, very cold. And the role that he played as the ship's musician was invaluable in terms of supporting the sense of socialization and the sense of morale amongst those sailors to get them through that long winter. And in many ways, that's representative of what we do on Song. We have created a vehicle to help people through difficulties in their mental health and well-being in a more creative and holistic way. And we've had certain challenges along the way, not least the sense of confidence that people bring to it. A lot of the time people don't feel like they're able to engage with what we do because they don't feel they're able to sing. And indeed, a stat that I pull out regularly is that 80% of adults have been told at some stage that they can't sing, and yet less than 1% of the population are actually tone deaf. And this is the point where I normally say, raise your hand if you think you're part of that 1%. And, you know, we haven't half the people raise their hand. Statistically speaking, it's incredibly unlikely. And so I kind of see it as a fictitious confidence gap that we have to overcome. And we overcome this through technology, through repertoire, and through an amazing team of leaders who are experts at making people feel confident, bringing that sense of engagement. And we do a lot about measuring the impact of our work, because one of our challenges was to move what we did from something which is a nice to have into something which the value of which can be really understood. And I think this is representative of the kind of movement towards a greater consciousness around mental health and well-being. It's understanding the way in which a well-being strategy can really positively impact an organization beyond, say, does someone feel immediately better thanks to that intervention. We do this through surveying, we do this through various data gathering, just in terms of, say, attendance by demographic, who's coming to what, and then looking at short, medium and long-term surveying around the benefit that it has to the organization, and importantly, the benefit that it has to the organizational culture, which is increasingly a way that people are looking at creativity and well-being as being intrinsically linked. We were supported by the Arts Council. We did a lot of work online throughout lockdown. We saw it as a hugely important thing that I'm sure, as the panel we will talk about today, the impact that COVID has had on people working from home, people being always on, people checking their emails at all times at night, not having a commute with which to unwind yourself. All these kinds of things are the challenges that we've come up against, and trying to find ways to help people to manage this, because when we sing, we are able to really unwind ourselves in new ways. And I think this is true of many different creative and holistic practices that people might adopt within the workplace. We get into a state of flow. We have, it's like a mechanism by which we can very quickly stop thinking about our Slack channel. We stop thinking about our budget because we are juggling a very complex process. We're thinking about pitch and tempo and rhythm, dynamics and lyrics. We're following what the conductor's doing. We're listening intently to what's going on around us. And that puts us in a state of flow and is a very mindful activity. It also helps us to connect better with those around us. We talk about the anecdote of the CFO standing next to the admin assistant. And in that moment, the admin assistant is helping the CFO with their tenor part, and the established hierarchies are temporarily suspended, and there's a much more humanizing effect, which is a thing, again, something which I'm sure we will talk about, is bringing a more human approach to how we're looking at well-being. So we run, in normal times, we run sessions up and down the country. At the moment, we are just online, but it's exciting to start having opportunities to be in front of people again and to hear the collective voices. So I'm not going to go on any longer. I'm going to pass over to our chair for the day, who is David.
Thanks, George. Thanks for the introduction and to give an insight into how the power of song and getting groups together can improve the overall state of people's mental well-being. So I'm going to start by first of all saying thank you everybody for joining, and we're going to quickly go around the panel just so that you know who's on the panel, and then we'll lead into, we've got 3 pre-prepared questions that we're going to address in turn. Obviously, we invite comments and questions in the chat box as we go through. So I'll start. My name is David Cronk. I'm Chief of Staff for Domainex, a small CRO. So we do early stage drug discovery. We're about 70 scientists. And I have over 35 years drug discovery experience with the industry. So my role is really much looking at how we can do things within the workplace to improve company culture and generally create a better sense of well-being and engagement for all of the staff. So I'll allow the panel to also briefly introduce themselves. Elisabeth, would you like to go first?
Sure, thank you, David. So I'm Elisabeth. I'm the founder of RiverRhee Consulting, and we're all about creating exceptional managers and teams. I'm a coach, facilitator, trainer, and a lot of the work that we're doing at the moment is around helping people to understand how they can be at their best and what they need to help them to be at their best. And obviously, if you can provide those conditions, then the well-being will follow. Hence my interest in this topic.
Thanks, Elisabeth. And Susie, you're next on my screen.
Hello, I'm Susie. I am I'm a mental health first aid instructor. Have spent an awful lot of time during COVID and the last 18 months delivering online training and support. I'm also a counsellor and have over 25 years experience of NHS and charity sector areas. And yeah, just excited to be here today to talk all things mental health and wellbeing. Thank you.
Thanks, Susie. Jules, did you want to reintroduce yourself, or are you happy just to carry on by?
No, I'm happy to carry on by. I think
Okay.
we've had enough introduction from me.
And last but by no means least, Lisa.
Hello, my name is Urquhart. I'm the editor of Vantage. It's an online news service for the biotech and pharma industry, hence my invite to this. I also manage a team of 6 people. So I'm very much interested in what I can learn here, but also to share that some of the experiences I've had managing my team through a pandemic where we didn't actually see each other for over 18 months, and some of the strategies and learnings I think I got through to help keep the team together over that period.
Okay, super, thanks everybody. And Lisa, whilst we're with you on the screen, I'm going to pose the first question to you, and then obviously the panel can chip in alongside. So Lisa, the first question is, many of the initiatives that are initiated for mental wellbeing are initiated by senior management and HR departments. What steps do you suggest to ensure that those individuals are also able to access those kind of schemes that are in place, but without fear of judgment?
This is quite an interesting question, because I was thinking about this, and I think a lot of mental health is, and particularly companies, is around company culture. And theoretically, the culture should come from the top. So you should be able to have this sort of virtuous circle where you have senior leaders that if they shouldn't basically be setting out mental health procedures for their own employees that they aren't going to follow themselves. So I think it's about having the culture and laying out very clearly as an organisation what you want to be doing with your employees' mental health. And that means everybody, if it's in the culture, then theoretically everybody should be able to access it. And so you should be able to get a situation where a senior management team do feel able to access it if it is part of the culture. And I think that needs to be built in over time as an organisation. If you're serious about mental health, you should be able to be demonstrating that. You should be able to have also various different ways of accessing that. Because when we talk about mental health and well-being, there's numerous things that we could be doing, like doing singing with George. You'd also have mental health first aiders like Susie. So I think it's the idea of a company, as an organisation, a company, you should be able to have a range of services that people can access, but then also as part of your culture, say if it's okay for everybody, it should be okay for the senior management team as well. And I don't think there's anything wrong with senior management teams admitting that they are vulnerable. And I think it really does help employees as well to know that, it's not just them struggling. And I think if people can be that open, then I don't think there should be a problem with senior management team accessing mental health facilities within their own organisation.
Thanks, Lisa. Elisabeth, from your position kind of developing leadership teams, how can you create that sort of psychological safety, if you like, within teams that translates down through the employees?
I think for me, it's all about that conversation about what we each need to be at our best. And I'm a strong advocate of neurodiversity, and we've had a separate webinar about that. But I think from the very moment that companies start recruiting for staff to actually make it natural for people to be able to talk about what they need to be at their best at work, and respecting that will be different for different people, so that you're really making it an open conversation right from the start, and you carry that on through the whole employment life cycle. It's like a standing agenda item in any conversation between a manager and their direct reports and within teams. I think that would really help.
And Susie, have you come across this as part of the training and the mental health first aid work that you do?
Yeah, we have, and I think everything, just echoing what Lisa and Elisabeth have said, it's about culture. It's around how companies can create a culture where mental health is an everyday conversation. But having said that, I also recognise that we're all saying that this would be lovely to have, and there's a huge amount of work that needs doing for us to have these cultures, or to change culture, because people are still scared about talking about mental health. It's still absolutely drowning in stigma and judgment for someone for someone to be brave enough to say, I'm struggling with my mental health. It's still very much seen as a sign of weakness in certain areas. And I think that we've kind of got this great big journey to go on, but actually what we could do is we could, by all working together, that change is not impossible, creating that culture where we can talk about mental health, where we can put our hands up and not be worried to look vulnerable and to talk about what our worries are. I think that we can achieve brilliant things from it. But I do that little shout out of going, there's a huge amount of work to do from that. And that's because of how the world still sees poor mental health. And sadly, it's just covered in stigma. But I do think if you even if you just look at this panel and all the different things that we're doing, actually, we could bring so many different things in to help create that culture. As you were saying, Lisa, it's kind of like you could have mental health first aiders. It's about the brilliant work that Elisabeth is doing, having George in, and we're all going to have different likes. It's not, when it comes to mental health, it's not a tick box of, oh yeah, tick that box, we've done something. You have to engage with your company and find out what is it that's going to help and support people's mental health. So if people feel included in that, and if they feel like they have a voice, then that starts this lovely change and lovely culture that we can create.
Yeah, it's very difficult, isn't it? I know from being relatively new in this role, you kind of almost feel you've got to prove yourself to be invincible. But, having fallen down that slippery slope before, of keep pushing myself to the point where I break, you kind of, to actually hold your hand up and say, stop, right now, stop, because otherwise you're not going to get anything out. I mean, it's a difficult conversation to initiate. And I don't know if, George, if you find that in some of the sessions that you run, people have a new awareness of themselves, that they feel more able to stick their hand up.
Yeah, interesting. I think actually what we do is find some people find quite exposing. And I think it can be quite difficult for people to be vulnerable. I think this idea of stigma, I think I absolutely echo a lot of what Susie said. And I think, there is still this idea of stigma. There is still an idea that we have to be seen to be invincible, and that we have to be completely, we have to be, perma strong, rather than demonstrating any amount of weakness whatsoever. But I think that is beginning to change. But I think it's changing for different organizations at different rates as well. The even defining what mental health and well-being really is, and then seeing that organizations are on hugely different places along the journey of where they're at in terms of bringing in initiatives or awareness or leaders, kind of leading by example. But yeah, I just think it's about a lot of it's around humanizing, recognizing that we all are humans, and the fact that we are all humans and that all work has always been about humans working, is that mental health and wellbeing is not a new thing. It's newly part of maybe boardroom discussions, but it has always been ever present in workplaces, and it's just about how people talked about it or not talked about it, and how people are able to deal with it.
Do any of the carry on? Sorry.
I was wondering, because we're talking about, you saying how do we frame it, and so I was wondering, we've seen quite good examples around things like gender diversity and diversity in general adding to productivity. So, and you were talking about the fact yourself, working until you break. I mean, that is not very good for productivity. So I wonder if there's a conversation to be had around ensuring that people's mental health is and well-being is ensured to aid productivity. Because at the end of the day, these are businesses, and people do care about the bottom line. So I wonder if it's worth making a kind of, if people can see that connection between productivity and mental health and well-being, maybe that's a way that we could start to frame the conversation.
Or indeed creativity.
Yeah.
In terms of innovation as well, in terms of, not just seeing it. I think the thing is, a lot of the time we see is well-being is always seen as an expense line rather than an opportunity. And I think maybe that's the shift that needs to happen, to be able to think about it as something which it's not just, oh, we need to have a line for well-being in our budget. It's like, we absolutely need to have,
in terms of how it impacts productivity of companies. That's, I mean, if it hits the bottom line, then people tend to start paying attention. rather than actually putting it into a budget line and just putting it, not actually integrating it into the company. That's what I mean by productivity. That's what I mean by that.
And I think you're right, Lisa, because I think that there are, I know MHFA England through the training, there are stats which are showing from a business perspective the impact and the cost poor mental health is having on the economy, on businesses. And I think you're absolutely right. It's being able to look at it to go, actually, yeah, if we get this right, this also, we produce and deliver on everything that we're supposed to be doing as a company, as well as looking after our staff. So I think you're absolutely right, Lisa. That's a lovely link. If a manager and a leader doesn't like that link, then that's like, why not?
It's interesting that in my work as a coach, coaching people who are within organisations, that coaches often get called in because people's productivity is suffering because their well-being is suffering. And wouldn't it be good if we had things in place that enable people to have that level of attention before the problems arose?
Yeah, many a day spent looking at things, not knowing where to start. And of course, that's completely not productive at all.
Yeah.
Iman, you made a comment in the chat box that.
Hello, yes, I actually have a background as an occupational health nurse, and I worked in industry and in the hospital and shops, and the dynamics is completely different. In shops, you know, the show has to go on, whether we are literally dropping to meet productivity, but we have done a lot of counselling. When I worked in the hospital, in one of the hospitals, people used to come to us and sort of say, look, I've got this problem, what should I do? So I did like assessing the situation, like assessment, prescription and implementation as well. So I think we need to look at everything as a holistic approach, but where do you go if you don't have these systems in place?
Yeah.
So this is what I bring to biotech and industry is my background as a nurse, really. And
do you think that the industries are more open to accepting that kind of approach, Yvonne, than they were several years ago? Yes,
because I've been in this industry for quite a few years, sort of progressing literally from nursing into industry. And I just see some people just might have a bad day, or they can't cope with things at home. So it might not just be work. They might have other
it out, isn't it?
underlying problems, you know, or they've sort of, the cat's died, you know, all those type of things. And you're not going to say that at work. You're not going to show that you've got a weakness, but you know, what you're going to do.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, what's work related and what's not. But at the end of the day,
that's what I'm saying. I think you need to take a holistic approach sometimes and look at the whole bigger picture rather than just this one problem.
Yeah.
David, I wondered if I could add one more thing, you know, to your initial question about kind of making it safe for people to talk about these things, which is the idea of mental health first aiders. I've heard people call them mental health champions. I'm interested in the concept of neurodiversity champions, but the idea is that it's people there who are not HR, they're not the senior manager, they're people you can go and talk to without worrying that it might get to HR or get to senior managers if you don't want it to. So it's like that space to have a confidential conversation with someone who's had some training, so that they can, you know, provide you with that sort of first level of support. That, to me, that sounds like a really useful thing for all organisations to provide.
I'm going to be this person again. We had these in our organisation, and it was a great idea. And we had a massive fanfare, and we unveiled our first aid, sort of like, you know, mental health first aiders. And amongst all the people, I was thinking, even then I wasn't too sure if I'd feel comfortable talking with somebody. So my idea was perhaps maybe we should have partner with another organisation, and then we could actually sort of swap between the two. where we could use the mental first aiders from another company, another similar company that we do. And I thought it'd be quite good in that way. We could actually learn, we can actually have exchange of ideas around what they're doing, perhaps around mental health, what we're doing. Yeah, because I didn't really feel like, going to, Roger from sales to talk about my mental health. I'm sure he'd been adequately trained for that, but it still felt too close to me. I don't know if anybody else got any thoughts about that.
Sorry, can I jump in there as well? I agree, Lisa, and I think as well that I will throw it out there. People interpret mental health first aiders very, very differently as to what their jobs are. Mental health first aiders aren't counsellors. They're not the ones to take everything on. And in actual fact, what a lot of mental health first aiders are, a lot of their training it's more about a focus of recognising signs in people and to give them the skills to start a conversation to then signpost. That's very, very different. Yeah, and I think that can be good, but because I absolutely agree with you, Lisa. If we're suddenly saying, it's like when you look at schools, they say that every school should have one mental health first aider, which I find hilarious for schools that have 1,000 children. But my argument was always going to be, well, hang on, if your one mental health first aider is the teacher that all the kids hate, they're never going to go and talk to them. And in actual, that's not going to work. And that's exactly the same within the workplace. So I think I love that idea, Lisa. I love the idea of different companies, but I think it's about, yes, I think that it is for people to be able to feel confident to go and talk to mental health first aiders. But I also do really, really advocate that your mental health first aider is also about starting to recognise, start a conversation to then signpost, which I think because we're all lovely and brilliant at putting on masks and going, yeah, I'm fine. And it's not until someone says, okay, so how are you? We're in a safe place. How are you?
Can I interrupt you again? I end up actually, as course of my work, people telling me all their personal things. I don't know how. It's just all of a sudden I'm like doing business with people, and then we'll go to the pub and it'll all come out. So I think you just need to be that approachable and trustworthy, that you're not going to be judgmental on that person, and just, as you say, direct them into the right way and just reflect back on what they want, really, on what they should do about it.
Yeah. I think at that point, in terms of that point of the conversation, in terms of what the individual wants, it's probably a good point to move on to the next question, which is I'm going to start with you, Elisabeth. Is how do we ensure that there's that balance between the employer does things that are both in the best interest of the individual whilst also being in the best interest of the company? Because there is a balance to find. And how do we achieve that?
Yeah, it's a balance to find, and it's a tension as well, isn't it? For me, it's about actually challenging assumptions that just because a company has always done things a certain way, that's the way to carry on doing it, or that it wouldn't be possible to change. So, for instance, I had someone ask me a while back about, what does she do if she has someone approach her and saying that the way they're going to work at their best is by having flexible hours. And then, the immediate thought was, well, if I let this person have flexible hours, am I doing some special treatment? And I played back to her, well, it may well be that a number of people would work more effectively. Your productivity would go up, your creativity, all those things, if you actually considered flexible hours across the board. So I think it's about just challenging the way companies do things historically and going, do we really have to keep things the same way as we've always done them? And could we actually improve not only individual productivity, but the whole of the company's productivity, creativity, and so on, if we were a bit more flexible about a number of different ways in which we expect people to do their work?
I mean, George, the way you're approaching it is obviously very creative. Like, how have you seen companies kind of strike that balance?
Well, I mean, what immediately springs to mind there is that it's not necessarily polarized in terms of being one or the other. You know, in terms of an organization being made up of people, you know, what is best for the people in terms of prioritizing them really is the best approach for the company. In so many ways in which we've kind of already identified. I mean, I think at the moment it's a very interesting time in terms of people's reaction to the pandemic, in terms of people's reaction to working at home or not, and at the juncture we're at now is in terms of the opportunity to try new things, and you know, as Elisabeth said, you know, challenging the maintained view of, oh, we've always done it like this, you know, now presents an opportunity where we can look at new ways of doing things, because in many ways, if we don't, then things won't move forward and won't change. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the organizations that we've worked with, certainly we have seen a shift over the course of, I mean, we've been going 6 years, and we've seen a shift in the way we are approached, going from something which is, I think, yeah, we sit as a kind of slightly more creative, holistic part of the well-being piece generally. But I think the general awareness that, you know, it is such a broad topic we're talking about here. We've already talked about, you know, all the way from how your boss is treating you through to how your cat's dying. If your cat's dying, you know, there are so many different things that we're talking about here. And, you know, it's almost as if just the starting of the conversation is a really valuable place to be even having this conversation, whereas, you know, a few years ago that wouldn't have even been happening. And the fact that I'm here talking about singing in the workplace, I mean, who knew? You know, the fact that even I'm able to be part of conversations like this, and that what we do is beginning to be recognized, I think it is a big step forward, because I'm very aware that, you know, in tough times, what we do isn't the silver bullet, and what we do isn't the kind of, you know, the what's going to solve all the well-being problems, but it can contribute to a much bigger kind of strategy and culture of well-being. And I think that it's that link between well-being and culture that I think is a really important, really interesting question to explore in this kind of shift that we're experiencing now in 2021.
Lisa, as a small business owner, have you come across this kind of difficulty in finding that balance, or is it relatively easy? You've got the right company culture there to facilitate it?
I think it is difficult, because pandemic has thrown up an awful lot of issues around the way that people work, and I think whether the expectations about how they will continue to work. So for instance, I know that my boss is very keen to get people back into the office. I'm not as keen as she is to go into the office. So I think there are going to be those sort of tensions around whether or not, you know, people want to come into the office, what amount of time they're going to come to the office. I also think that there also has better understanding in terms of people being more flexible. Because I don't think, once again, turning back to work productivity, I don't think we've seen a drop off in productivity in people actually working from home. Do people work better in the office? I think in certain situations, like for instance, mentoring of young people, some of our junior staff, we've got people that have been hired and left and I've never even seen them, but in person. So I think we're getting to those sort of relationships, and I think maybe there needs to be some sort of give and take on both sides. It's a tricky one, and I also think because the way that the labour market is at the moment, I don't think companies can afford to be inflexible, because there are a lot of job vacancies out there, and if people, they can now start voting with their feet. So I think while there is, like, you know, there's a push-pull, I think there is a will to find compromise between the two. Because if people don't like it, they will find alternative employment, as we're seeing with people at the whole idea around vaccines. I'm obviously pro-vaccine, but the fact that people, if they are hesitant about vaccines, are prepared to leave their work, you know, that's a massive issue that we're seeing around sort of like, you know, the balance between employers and employees. So I think it's trying to find accommodation as employers that to make sure that people feel comfortable, and also talking to people and actually finding out what people want. So for instance, you know, I don't feel comfortable coming to the office, but if, you know, there are certain quiet days I might want to come into the office, or there are quiet sections, you know, or, you know, because, you know, I don't feel comfortable at the end of social distancing if we had a section of the office that was socially distanced. So I think it's about, while there may be tensions, I think it might be more about opening dialogues and talking to people about the differences and seeing where we can actually meet in the middle.
And have you come across, Susie, have you come across any of those tensions when you've been talking to organisations or training people? Those kind of things come up?
I think it's, yeah, I think it's just, I mean, my approach has just very much been with everyone. As soon as everything started changing, was very much, I'll work with each individual company, and picked up very quickly that everyone was going to deal with this in their own way. And so then I just offered my flexibility and was like, okay, we can do it online, we can do it face to face, we can chop and change it, we can. And I think, and maybe that probably just came in, and that was probably always a little bit there, and that's my approach for training. You know, if you're going to do training on what's classed as quite a hard, difficult conversation, so, and I kind of like, I live by the rule of, well, actually, I'll always make sure that this is engaging, it's enjoyable, it's sensitive, and I kind of, I take that into my day-to-day training, because I want to create a safe place for what might be hard conversations or learning as well. But I think that also that from COVID times, it's about actually more than ever, that's really important that I'm having those conversations with companies to say, how do your team want this delivered? Because make sure you're only sending people on this training that want to learn about mental health. Please don't force people to, because they're going to hate every second of it. Don't send someone on training for mental health training awareness if they hate talking about mental health. I always tell a beautiful story. I went into I did some training with 16 football coaches, who I am going to say were all men. And we started the first 2 days, this was just before the pandemic, and I started off just saying, like, be really, really honest. Tell me, how are you feeling about being at this training? And they were honest. And they all just said, well, we've been told to be here. I'm fine. I haven't got mental health. It was a lovely statement that every single one of them said. But we went on a beautiful journey, and by the end of the 2 days, they were kind of sharing an awful lot. That mask came down. We had a safe place, and I think that the pandemic is teaching us that we have to work with each other and be open to find ways of work.
From the other people on the call outside of the panel, what experiences have you had within your own organisations of things that have worked and haven't worked, and do you think your organisations are taking the right steps? Always a risk asking the delegates to
I'll share one of my experiences. So the organisation that I used to work for, we started to do kind of like a Wellness Wednesday. And with a lot of things like that, they don't tend to last more than maybe a couple of months. And one session in particular, we did laughter yoga. And it was kind of a team bonding activity. And for a lot of people, it was quite far out of their comfort zones. And the purpose of the session was because the brain can't differentiate between real laughter and fake laughter. And some people really enjoyed it, and others just really didn't. But I think it was a good activity to kind of bring the teams together. I mean, we joked about it for a while afterwards, but you could really see that some people were kind of maybe stressing in the back of their head, this is an hour where I'm not really enjoying myself, where I could be doing emails or stuff like that. But yeah, that's one of my experiences.
It comes back to that productivity, doesn't it? Is this an hour that's through which I'm being productive, and is that productive for the company, or is it productive towards myself? And do you feel guilty about investing that time in yourself? And I think that's something we probably as individuals, many of us need to get better at, is that actually we're worth investing the time in.
One thing that came out from a discussion we had recently was a sort of almost like a what have we got to lose kind of thing, that you know, in a lot of cases we've got to try, and obviously something is not working, because I think as Elisabeth said, we need to move away from the point where work breaks us and then we need to find a fix for it. We actually need to be much more on the preventative piece of making sure that it stops it from happening in the first place. Yeah, and in terms of the best you know, in terms of the interest of the organisation, taking it back to the question, or the individual, a lot of the time it's, you know, we're so early on in this kind of you know, journey of understanding what people need, what organisations need, that I sometimes think about the role of the wellbeing manager almost as a kind of entrepreneur, that they have to be selling in ideas to get budgetary sign-off from above, and at the same time then trying to sell these ideas to get the engagement from the people that they're supposed to be engaging. And you know, yeah, it's almost a kind of what have we got to lose? Let's try these things, let's see what sticks, because some stuff's going to work for some and some's really not going to. Some people might really enjoy singing, some people might really enjoy laughter yoga, and for some people mental health first aid may be the worst thing they could imagine, but for others it's really, really impactful. But it's almost like if you don't try, you're never going to know. And so I think in terms of what is the best thing for the organisation, I mean, no one really has an answer for that. But I think it's about giving things a try. You know, in terms of what we do, you have to get people to try it once. If you get people to try it once, they're more than likely going to come back and do it again. But it's getting that initial engagement is the real challenge. Hence the kind of the entrepreneur analogy.
Yeah, I sometimes take a bit of a rebellious attitude to when we're working with managers, and we talk about the fact that the people who are working for a company, they're actually lending their time to the company, and the company therefore has kind of owes them a duty of care to look after these people who are lending their time to the company. And for me, that tips that question that you asked, David, about, you know, is it about looking after a company or looking after the individual? You absolutely need to look after the individual. That's the only way that the company is going to be successful.
Yeah, Yvonne raised an interesting point earlier on, yeah, that often there are other things underneath the surface, and you know, I guess always kind of talk to leave your personal problems at the door when you walked in the morning and pick them up again on the way out in the evening. Of course, it's impossible to do, and you can cope with if things are perhaps not going so well outside of work and they're going okay in work, but you just need to get up that perfect storm, and it's, you know, sticking your hand up and saying, look, I've got a real problem. The cat is ill, or the cat has died. I'm really off my game today. I think that's a different story to put across. And look, you're just pushing me too hard here. Just back off. It's just finding that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think just following on from that as well, David, I think it goes back to, again, it's not that simple, is it? Because we're all different. So our mental health is going to be very different. We all have different resilience, levels of resilience. We all have different coping mechanisms. You know, I think you're absolutely right. It's that balance between home and work, isn't it? But then actually, you know, if work applies a lot of pressure, that can be causing problems in people's home life. Likewise, you know, I can remember, gosh, 10 years ago, my ex-husband walked out on me. My coping mechanism was going to work, because at 8:30 every morning, I could switch off and not think about it, and it was beautiful. And actually, I probably did some of the best work I've ever done in my life. My manager asked after a while, "What's going on? You're on fire." And then after about 5 months, I said, "My husband's left me," and then I broke down. And then I kind of was like, "Oh, okay, I might need a bit of time out now." And I think that's, you know, but then having said that, I've seen other people experience that same situation, and actually, no, work wasn't their coping mechanism. And I think that does go back to that beauty. It is the individual, and it is about, but also finding that balance between what's the work responsibility, what's the home responsibility, but they overlap. whatever's going on in one or the other will have an impact on someone's life. So is this just about, oh God, I'll chuck the kind word, is it just about being kind, about just being mindful that we're all human beings, we all have different coping mechanisms, but we also have a lot going on in our lives, you know? And just kind of going, all right, and absolutely, how do we get that right? Because what's going to help me is not necessarily going to help Elisabeth. And when you're all in one workplace, it's not easy, but at least we can all start having that conversation.
Yeah.
I wonder if it's about having a consistent attitude towards employee well-being, because I know that my management style is very, very different to other people's in my organisation. For instance, I don't care where my team work. They could be, for all I know, half of them could be Bermuda right now, but as long as they deliver on what they're doing, I don't care where they are. I also don't care if they finish a bit early, and that means that they can go and pick up their children, or they can do, the people that don't have children, they can go and do something else. As long as what we agree to deliver is being delivered, I'm not that fussed about how it gets delivered. But I know there are other people that are very much about, I need to see them, I need to know they're working, not watching Netflix at home. So I'm just wondering how we get that kind of, it's almost trust, I guess, engendered in, and trust and kindness and flexibility, I think, in organisations. And for that to be seen, a touchy-feely style of management, but I don't care. I like being touchy-feely. I like knowing what my team are up to. I like the thought that if they were in trouble, they could come to me. So, but I don't know how that contrasts with other people I know who are completely the opposite, and couldn't think of it more horrifying than knowing about the lives of their personal lives of their employees. So
it's a really interesting question. We've just been through the exercise actually in terms of trialing hybrid working and that kind of stuff. And we used to be you record the time you entered the building, and we're going to record the time you go out of the building. It's like, no, this is hybrid working. You basically tick a box in when you come in the building for fire safety, and you tick it when you leave out. And actually it was the middle layers of management that had more challenge adjusting to it than the opposite ends of the spectrum. I think this comes down to that whole trust in, well, I need to know where my team are, and I need to know what project's going to be delivered on. It's like, do I limit the number of flexible days they can take a month? It's like, you just limited it, therefore it's not flexible. So it's, how far you want to take it. Trust people and they won't abuse the system, right? And again, if they then trust you, they're more likely to come back with that, I've got a problem, I'm being worked too hard, I just need to take some time out. So it's really difficult, isn't it? You've got to kind of extend that trust to start with for it to be reciprocated, I think. It's just how you do it. Yeah, it's a very interesting journey.
And lead by example. In the days where I'm struggling to get everything done, I might say to my team, another thing is like building a good team around you. And I can say, look, I'm struggling today. I've got to leave at this point because I've got to do X. And they'll go fine, because they know that when they meet that, I will also be flexible with them. And I know that they will pick up the slack for me. So I think it creates a virtuous circle as well. I think people, that trust element.
No,
and it also means that people feel as if they can say I'm struggling, because I can put my hand up and say I need to leave early because my darling daughter has a piano recital. Not that she plays piano, but
I was going to go to the vet.
I've got to take my daughter to the vet.
Yeah, easier than getting the doctor's appointment, that's for sure. I've got half an hour of the time. We've got one more question to go. I'm going to start with you, Susie, and that's, is there a danger that after this kind of initial surge of interest in mental well-being, particularly associated with the pandemic, that as that surge kind of starts to fade away, organisations will revert back to their kind of old ways, so to speak, and stop paying so much attention to it? Do we just see a trend of lip service rather than actual action?
Yeah, I think it's God, the worry is that happens, but I think we have to acknowledge and talk about it. So I know that from my perspective, actually, the 18 months of through the pandemic, I was kind of like on this whirlwind of a journey of delivering training and support and different types of things for people. And it's not at the level it was this time last year. This time last year, people were, you know, it was like, suddenly we were talking about mental health. Now, yeah, I've been a home worker for the past 20 years. So when we first went into lockdown and suddenly the world and the news was talking about everyone's mental health because they're a home worker, how are we going to cope with this? And I can remember sitting there and kind of like going, well, some of us have been doing it for quite a while, and no one checked in on my mental health, like crikey, 20 years of being a home worker. And I think it was really interesting for me to just sit back and observe how the world reacted, kind of like, but balancing it, knowing that we were dealing with a pandemic, but this whole different ways of working. And I think at first it was a little bit like, oh, what do we do? And I think there was a bit of a panic reaction of, we've got to support everyone's mental health. And I think it kind of like, there was this genuine interest of like, this is okay to talk about, not just we have to talk about this. It's also, it was then about actually, yeah, this is why, yeah, let's embrace it. Let's do as much as we can, and let's use this opportunity to talk about mental health, and a little bit looking at that culture, isn't it? And it's a little bit, it does come back to budgets and money. People suddenly had budgets that weren't being spent on other things because no one was going out and doing anything. So suddenly they had spare budgets to, let's do a bit of mental health first aid training, because they're screaming, like they're all offering it to everyone. And I don't get that now. I don't get the interest that I had this time last year. You know, people are interested. I think it's, you know, from whether that's from the corporate world, it's from education, it's from the charity sector. I think, you know, I kind of had the privilege of working with lots of different areas and organisations. And my worry is that everyone's got to now focus on what the next chapter looks like and how's it do. And I appreciate that with that comes lots of questions and lots of planning and new budgets. And it worries me that mental health headline in the news has disappeared and we're not talking about that as much. And what worries me is that actually, you know, what everyone has been through in the last 18 months isn't just going to go away with a vaccine. Doesn't go away. You know, some of us have grieved family and friends and are still grieving, and it will take us years. It can take years anyway to live with grief, to go through a grief experience, grief through a pandemic, to not be able to go to funerals, you know, or maybe, you know, personal health and experiences. This is going to stay with people for a long time, and a lot of these things will be reasons why they may not want to come into the workplace, or just about that shift in change in how it's been at home. You know, we know there was an increase in domestic violence. You know, let's not forget those big headlines that was kind of stimulating us all to have mental health first aid training, but to talk about mental health. And my worry is now it's about who's coming into the office, who's hot desking, who's coming at home. And my worry is that conversation has become a little silence, which just upsets me, because everyone will have their COVID story, but I will lay money on the fact that most of us will never actually share our true COVID story. We will be keeping that to ourselves, and that worries me slightly.
Thanks, Susie. George, have you got any? Oh, sorry, Elisabeth. You see you wave a hand there.
I mean, you know, what Susie's saying absolutely resonates with me. It's not hitting the headlines in quite the same way, but I think, you know, organisations like One Nucleus, those of us who are managers, those of us who are coaches and trainers, we can use the opportunities that we have of continuing to talk to people to, you know, encourage them that they have choice about how they lead their working lives. They have the ability to self-advocate for what they need. They can challenge. They can use all of us, you know, to help them to challenge. So, you know, we can help to keep that conversation alive.
Thank you. George, have you got any views on this?
Well, I think I take quite an optimistic view that the direction of travel is a positive one. I think maybe the acceleration that was seen through COVID was maybe a bit of a spike, but I do think it's all going in a very positive direction. I think in terms of the 6 years that we've been doing what we do, we've seen a huge shift. Someone brought my attention to an article around ESG, and I think the wider kind of board executive level thinking has moved the dial on this, or the dial has moved in terms of their thinking. It talked about Al Gore in 2004, who proposed a sustainable investment fund focusing on sustainable businesses, and there was a lot of raised eyebrows and quite a lot of like, cool. Good one, Al. Let's see how that one goes. And to think now in terms of the narrative around COP26, in terms of where we've come on the environmental agenda, you know, that is astronomical in terms of where we come in however many of those 17 years. And I think the similar thing, if that's the E in ESG, then the S, the social side, has seen a shift, and I think it is only going one direction. And I don't think we will necessarily be dialing back. I think the other reason that I think it's cultural, and I think it's around the expectation of organizations to provide the right level of support and to be active and to have leaders who are leading by example, because the next generation is a talent war, and I think that they are going to demand it, and I think organizations have to recognize that, otherwise they're in trouble. You know, we saw an article about, we're looking at there's the ISO 45003, which is around mental safety at work, which is kind of on the tails of obviously the sort of physical health and safety. There are now directives, they're not mandatory, but there are directives around supporting mental health at work. And in America last year, they brought in, America, who was kind of a bit ahead of the curve on this one, America brought in, for publicly listed companies, there are metrics which you have to start reporting on around kind of human metrics. So thinking about attrition and churn and these kinds of things, which are directly representative of the culture within that organization. So it's almost like the reporting that's now happening is directly mirroring or directly demonstrating the way the organization are treating their people. And I think that these kinds of things are going to be that organizations just cannot ignore it. And they're going to have to take note to keep up, basically.
Perfect, thank you. And Lisa, we've got 2 minutes left to run. I'm going to kind of throw the floor over to you for the last minute before we hand back to Jazz and the One Nucleus team. Have you got anything else you want to add on this particular topic as to whether we're going to lose momentum or we run the risk of losing momentum?
No, I think George was spot on. I mean, it is going to be, I think the genie is now out of the bottle in terms of actual sort of flexibility and what employees expect from employers. And I think companies that don't recognise that and accommodate will basically, they will be losing out in those talent wars.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. With that, thanks very much to my co-panelists. A really enjoyable discussion, and Jazz, back to you.
Thanks, guys. I just want to say a huge thank you. That was such an interesting discussion, and I think some key takeaways for me are kind of the importance of creating a safe space that people can have open conversations, and just being aware that what may work for someone isn't going to work for everybody. So yeah, I mean, really, really great session. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who attended. And I hope to see you at some more of our employer of choice sessions, and have a really, really lovely day.
Thanks, everybody. Contributions.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
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 Bye-bye.